I am the chosen one of God, the one foretold in the Bible.
The other intelligence agencies that seem to be behind all global events.
Lucifer, therefore, is the incarnation of Mary.
As an ex-military guy, I'm interested, how do they operate?
Usury is unlawful.
We're talking people that must be skilled in advanced explosives.
And this plant, of course, is the hemp plant.
Because we're so programmed.
And if they didn't get away with 9/11, they would never have been able to carry out 7/7.
Knowing they're going to massacre thousands of people.
They say this also applies to people who've turned a blind eye to the dropping of the chemical weapon white phosphorus.
The small state comes first.
And see people spouting this kind of dark New Age philosophy.
And this network is vast.
Make love the law.
What people believe was 9/11.
His wife gets in front of the television screen.
What they saw on the television.
He had been one man standing against the Zionist New World Order.
Yes, Dave, I'm absolutely fantastic. It's great to have you on the show. I feel like I know you because I've been involved in the whole 911 thing from the start. You mentioned in our correspondence Willie Rodriguez, the janitor in the World Trade Center, who I've met on a couple of occasions now. He's been on the show. I met him here in England when he did his tour, saying that the explosions came from the basement. Yeah, I feel like I know you. And as I mentioned, we had Annie on the show, your fellow MI5. Was she a whistleblower too, or just by...
Yeah, she kind of blew the whistle with me. I was the principal whistleblower, but she was there to back me up. And then when we split up in 2006, she kind of carried on my work whistleblowing while I was totally blacklisted.
Got you. So, David, let's just get straight to it. For those of us that aren't in the know, we've got these notions that MI5 is this big, fancy black building in London where James Bond walks in and out of, and we're miles from the reality of it. How is our secret services set up? Are there layers above it that the public are never going to know about? Obviously, there's the connection with the other intelligence agencies worldwide that seem to be behind all global events. By deception, thou shalt wage war is a little clue there. So how does it all work? And is it sort of like mundane desk job sort of stuff? And how did you get into it?
Yeah, there's a number of questions there. The first one, how did I get into it? I've got to stress that I was not really a kind of queen and country man. I come from the northeast of England, working class background, made good. But I went to university, had a liberal education. I was a journalist. I won an award as a student journalist with my student newspaper, the only time Dundee University student newspaper Anasac ever won an award because I put my life and soul into it. I lived in the newspaper office. I've been an activist in the 80s, protesting against Thatcher's cuts and curiously exposing the Official Secrets Act as well, which was passed in 1989, which was the act that was actually subsequently used to prosecute me in the early noughties. So I was looking for jobs in journalism, and I came across an ad in the media section of the Independent newspaper, which said Godot isn't coming. Now, those people who don't know who Godot is, it's a play by Samuel Beckett called Waiting for Godot, in which the eponymous character doesn't turn up. There are two acts to it, of two people essentially waiting for this man to arrive, and he never turns up. The description of the ad was very much like a job in journalism. It said, are you up with current affairs? Can you write? And so on. So that to me was a bit like journalism. And I stress as well that I now believe that this ad was what was called in the intelligence services as a come-on to me. No one else was recruited by that ad, and anybody who knew me at the time would know that I was extremely interested in the works of Samuel Beckett, who wrote Waiting for Godot, and the theatre of the absurd in general. So if you wanted to catch my attention with an eye-catching advert, you would put something like Godot isn't coming in the title. Anyway, I sent off an application, and I stressed that I was an activist. I was a journalist. So So when I went through the recruitment process, they asked me about what I'd done to change the world. And I told them that I'd published extracts of Spycatcher in the 1980s in my student newspaper, which at the time was a banned book in Britain. A friend of mine had been to Australia and come back with a copy of it. So we published the section in which the author of Spycatcher, Peter Wright, a former MI5 officer, had outlined how certain MI5 and MI6 officers had plotted against the Labour government of the late 1970s, led by Harold Wilson, claiming that Harold Wilson was in fact a KGB agent. Now, again, this is just total misinformation. Harold Wilson was a very, very capable politician in some of the 1960s, modernised Britain. He was a lower middle class man. He didn't come from a highfalutin background, but had got one of the best degrees from Oxford of the 20th century. So a great mind who understood the world and could therefore take on some of these forces of darkness. And when you do take them on, they will try and blacken your character. So I was recruited to MI5 and joined in 1991. Now, I stress as well about this is because I had been an activist. I said I want nothing to do with people who are investigating activists. And they said, well, we don't investigate activists. We did investigate subversives in the Communist Party, the anarchists and so on. And I said, well, I'm still really not interested. They said, well, now our work switched to terrorism. Now, at the time, my mentality was that of a liberal, and I saw all terrorists like the IRA as people who were trying to undermine democracy and liberal values. And therefore, I was attracted to stopping terrorism. And I did work against the IRA for 2 years in a new section set up to deal with the IRA on the British mainland. And we had enormous successes. I had one case of a man called Sean McNulty. I was the case officer for that. It was the first intelligence-led arrest and conviction against the IRA on the British mainland, and by MI5. And he got 22 years. He was, of course, released under the Good Friday Agreement. But I also worked in other cases like Rab Friars and Hugh Jack, and people can look this up for themselves, who are prominent members of the IRA's mainland campaign. And therefore, that work made Britain a safer place. They weren't putting down bombs anymore because they were arrested. I also worked on Libya and the Lockerbie issue. And at the time, what I found extraordinary, because I actually read about the conspiracy theories about Lockerbie before I joined the service. So when I was posted in October 1994 to the Libyan desk, I had what can only be described as a conspiracy theorist wet dream. I could go through all the intelligence service files. And I found that actually the conspiracy theories about Lockerbie were arising from MI6 briefing the British media through a section called Information Operations in MI6. Now, they say they're putting stories in the press that are often made up, but are supposed to support Britain. But I would argue they're not. They're actually working, they're stories that work in the interests of MI6. And of course, what they were trying to do was blame Iran and the PFL-PGC, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. So you can see even then they were trying to blame Iran and the Palestinians for a terrorist act, so that these people who are obviously seen as the enemies of Israel were blackened in the eyes of the British people. That was not true. All the evidence led to Libya, and one guy was convicted at trial, which is a very high standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt. One got off on a technicality. But nevertheless, the Libyans paid massive compensation for the Lockerbie attack. And I would say that is proof that they were in fact responsible. So the conspiracy theories are wrong in this case, and the actual official story was absolutely right. But in terms of what the services do, we have two services, MI5, which is a domestic security service, and MI6, which is an external intelligence gathering organisation. Now, MI5 does the whole range of things. It investigates the terrorists, but it also assesses how high your walls need to be in your air bases. It assesses how you handle classified documents, for example. And in my time, of course, its work was converted to evidence where it could be in terms of things like surveillance and so on, so it could be used in court. MI6 never has its material ever appear in court. It's an extremely shadowy organisation that I actually believe is working to a Zionist brief and therefore is treasonous. And one of the reasons I blew the whistle was that MI6 funded operatives with connections to bin Laden, who are Islamic extremists who want to set up a Sharia law state in Libya, and they were paid by MI6 to assassinate Gaddafi and take power. In fact, it was about 30 years ago now that I learned in this plot that they actually paid this money to these Islamic terrorists in Libya. Now, I was obviously enormously concerned about this because although people generally didn't know about the threat of Islamic terrorism until 9/11, we knew about the intelligence services at this time. In fact, Gaddafi was actually the man exposing bin Laden at that point and saying this man is an enormous threat to our countries. So it didn't make any sense to assassinate Gaddafi, who was in fact given up terrorism by this point, to back people who posed a threat to British lives. This made absolutely no sense whatsoever in terms of a conventional view of the world. But of course, you realise that MI6 is working to a Zionist brief, and that Islamic terrorism is in fact not Islamic. It's actually all promoted by the Zionists in terms of false flag and so on. You realise it makes sense in terms of that kind of interpretation. So that was why when I saw that operation had gone ahead, they attacked Gaddafi in a cavalcade of cars, but they got the wrong car. A bomb went off, civilians died, about 11 civilians. I, at that point, decided I had to leave the service. I did not want to be part of terrorism. As I say, I joined the services to protect human life and to stop terrorism. So when I realised that, that I was party to a plot in which the MI6 had funded this, I didn't want to have anything to do with that, and took every step I could to get out of the service as quickly as possible. I had to get another job, of course, which I did, and then I left in October 1996. So my experience with them was that MI6 is working against the interests of this country, basically, and they are much less accountable than MI5, and the profile of their officers is very, very different. MI5 is very much what I would call a minor public school, grammar school culture, whereas MI6 was the grander public schools and the grander families. And these people just have the utmost arrogance. MI6 was absolutely useless at what it was supposed to do in terms of gathering security intelligence on behalf of MI5 abroad. The reason I was briefed on the plot was I'd actually worked very closely with them to try and bring some management into their activities, to try and set some targets and assess how we were making progress towards those targets, which is just very basic management, but really wasn't going on anywhere in the intelligence services at the time.
Yes, it's probably quite a lot to take in, I'd imagine, for people unfamiliar with this area. So can you just explain? I went to Lockerbie. I was running the length of the country one time for charity. And as I came through Scotland, I saw this sign, it said Lockerbie, and I had to just divert off my route and go there because it was a massive thing for us growing up, that this peaceful Scottish village, suddenly overnight this jumbo jet rained down on them, and houses were burning and bodies were everywhere. And it was... that was it. That was quite an emotional pilgrimage for me, you could say. And the amazing thing was the people there were so lovely. You just thought, oh my God, you didn't deserve this stain on your town. Stain, as in the horrible thing in history. But the Al-Megrahi thing. So what are you saying, Dave? That he didn't do it, or he was set up, but it was for what aim by Israel?
Yeah, the point was that in October 1988, 2 months before the Lockerbie attack, there'd been an arrest of a cell of Palestinian terrorists in Frankfurt called the Operation Autumn Leaves, and because of that, people thought that and there'd been an attack upon an Iranian civilian jet airliner in the summer of '88. So when Lockerbie happened 6 months later and there'd been the arrest of these Palestinian cells, they presumed the elements that they hadn't arrested from this Palestinian cell in Frankfurt had been responsible for the Lockerbie attack. But as the investigation went on, the evidence very clearly pointed towards Libya. For example, they discovered a scrap of clothing that had been, they analysed, had been very close to the bomb blast, i.e. in the suitcase where the bomb had been. But that had a serial number of the trousers manufacturer on, and that serial number worked out to a manufacturer in Malta, who were then able to tell investigators that they'd actually given the trousers to a particular shop called Mary's House, owned by Tony Gauci in Malta. So they were then able to interview Tony Gauci, and he had said on the 7th of December, this man had come in and he made these weird purchases. He's just randomly picking clothes off the shelf. Not like he wanted it for his children or his wife or anything. He was just picking this, a baby grow, a pair of trousers, an umbrella and so on, just randomly. And he'd been obviously slightly suspicious about this. So when they interviewed him about it, he said, well, actually, this man was a Libyan. And that was the first indication that, in fact, this was the Libyan intelligence services. So what I'm saying is, that was al-Megrahi. He was identified by Gauci. And he was collecting the material to put into the bomb suitcase. His accomplice, Lamin Al-Fima, was working as an employee of Libyan Arab Airlines. Now, this is really important here because one of the conspiracy theories is to do with this autumn leave cell I was talking about in Frankfurt, they were arrested in October 88. They arrested the bomb maker, a man called Marwan Kresat. Now, he said, I made 5 bombs for them that I put into Toshiba cassette recorders. I can account for 4 of them. They've been used. So this warning goes out to all the airlines in the world, including, of course, Libyan Arab Airlines, saying, look out for a Toshiba cassette recorder in people's luggage. It may be a bomb. Now, obviously, when people in the Lockerbie attack, when they forensicated the actual bomb itself, it had been placed inside a Toshiba cassette recorder. But crucially, this was a stereo Toshiba cassette recorder. The warning hadn't made it clear that the things that Kresat had made, the bombs they had made, were actually in a single speaker Toshiba cassette recorder. So it's not equivalent. The other main difference was Kresat's devices were on what was known as a barometric timer. That means if it's in the hold of a plane, when the pressure drops, the bomb is exploded. This we discovered with the bomb that attacked the flight PA-103 over Lockerbie was in fact just a simple straight timer. And in fact, the Libyans, the reason they were attacking a Pan Am jet was because it was just before Christmas and there were lots of security and intelligence personnel from the US government on that plane. And this was a revenge attack for the bombing of Tripoli in 1986, when US F-111s had taken off from the UK with the permission of the UK government to bomb Libya. Now, this was a war crime. Innocent people died. Margaret Thatcher was party to that war crime because she allowed it to happen by allowing the planes to take off. They wouldn't have the range to attack Libya from America. So that was a war crime.
Was that the one, Dave, was that the one where Gaddafi's child was killed?
Yeah, that information has been slightly disputed later after the fall of Libya, but I don't believe it. I think it's misinformation. I think he genuinely did lose a child, but many other innocent people in Libya died as a result of those attacks, as will happen if you bomb somebody. So that, to me, was an act of terrorism. It was a war crime, again, for which nobody was brought to justice. And at the time, of course, the British people were very opposed to war crimes. At the time in the 1980s, people like my grandparents were still alive who'd experienced the bombing of Britain by the Nazis. So they had the compassion to think that we do not want people being bombed and so on. This is not how the world should work. And as I say, as a result of that bombing, there was the revenge attack on the flight PA-103. Now, the Libyans didn't intend for that bomb to go off over Britain. The problem with the Libyan intelligence services is absolutely true. They failed to allow the hours difference between Europe and Britain at the time. We were on GMT at the time, but the continent was an hour ahead of us. So that meant that the plane should have gone off over the Atlantic, where it would be very, very difficult, of course, to recover any kind of forensics. However, because they didn't allow for the hour's time difference, the bomb went off over the British mainland and the plane landed on Lockerbie. Now, it's extremely important that I did this operation because it gave me an insight into aviation terrorism. Now, when a plane goes down for any reason at all, not even terrorist related, there's what is called an air crash investigation. Now, this is a formal open inquiry. It's public. And what they do is obviously recover all the pieces they can. They recreate the plane in a hangar, and they forensicate the parts so they can decide how that plane has fallen out of the sky. And obviously, in this case, they realised it was a bomb placed in the luggage hold by the cockpit. The bomb had gone off, and as a result of that, the cockpit had severed off, and the plane started to plummet. Now, I stood in that reconstructed plane in the hangar near Lockerbie. And that motivated me. I stood there and thought, my God, what was it like for those people sitting there and seeing the cockpit come off? Because they would have been conscious for a few seconds with that sheer horror of that. And as they plummeted to Earth, they would have become conscious again as they plummeted, knowing that they were plummeting to their deaths. Now, I was so motivated by that injustice that made me really stand up for the truth about Lockerbie, because I say a lot of people in the British state at the time wanted to use it against Iran and the Palestinians, and I made sure that the police, that MI6 even, have been putting out this fake information, that the government all knew that we had good evidence against Libya, and we had to bring the two to trial, to justice by bringing them to trial. And I even opened the back channel that actually led to the diplomatic negotiations that meant the two were extradited to The Hague for a trial in a third-party neutral country. So I did my bit there for the country. I really did my bit for humanity and peace. But of course, that knowledge of air crash investigations has become extremely useful in the case of 9/11, where you'll find there are no air crash investigations for any of those planes. Now, people come up with various things they didn't need to carry out. Well, how would they know it was these planes if you haven't done the forensication, if you haven't recovered the parts with a serial number on showing you it was the plane they are alleging went into the North Tower, for example. It was the plane that went into the Pentagon. That process of evidence didn't take place. So, and of course, I would say, applying Occam's razor, the reason there are no air crash investigations is because no planes crashed that day. It's as simple as that. And that was obviously the beginning of my journey. I'd obviously been involved in my own stuff. The government had taken me to court. They'd taken 2 years to put me on trial after I'd come back to the UK. I was then involved in stop the war, because I was trying to stop the war going into Iraq, realizing that would lead to a generation of conflict and ironically a rise in Islamic terrorism, which of course is exactly what we've seen, and the falling of the Syrian state to what essentially is ISIS, which is Al-Qaeda rebranded. So when I became free of all of that, I was approached by the 9/11 truth movement, and I obviously had taken a view that this was extreme incompetence because I hadn't looked at the primary source evidence. And then I said to the 9/11 truth movement, well, there must be forensic reports and air crash investigations. And they said, no, there aren't any. I did the investigation and realised that we have the biggest terrorist attack in history and absolutely no investigating goes on. There's no attempt to secure crime scenes. There's nothing, no forensication, no air crash investigations. So we can say, hand on heart, there is no primary source evidence to say that American Airlines Flight 11 went into the North Tower, for example, or United Airlines 175 went into the South Tower. There just simply isn't the evidence there to say that in the first place. This is something that was put into the media and was blindly accepted from day one without any kind of follow-up at all. So what we were having was trial by media. They named bin Laden as responsible on day 2. Now, bearing in mind, this is chaos in New York. There's no forensication gone on. I know after a terrorist attack, the first day is just trying to find out exactly what's happened and so on. And yet here they are naming bin Laden as responsible. 48 hours after the attack, they tell us with absolute certainty that the 19 Muslim hijackers are the people who carried out these attacks and hijacked planes. But again, when you check this, you realise that they have 19 names. Only 6 of them have dates of birth. Now, when I was in MI5, to identify somebody, you needed at least a date of birth, and if not some kind of address or other corroborating, identifying information to say that person was the person involved. So none of that's gone on at all. And even then, you can look in the mainstream media, the BBC, the Daily Telegraph. You can talk to diplomatic people like the Saudis, and they will tell you that 6 of those 19 people are on the record as saying, I'm alive up to 9/11. It wasn't me. Now, we know that one of them had reported their passport stolen. So what we have here is a series of created identities for these attacks. Now, the other thing that obviously came up at that time and came up very early on was the arrest of what are known as the dancing Israelis, the 5 Israelis who were arrested just over the river, who have later said they were at the time, they were cheering the attack. Somebody was looking out their apartment building after the attacks had happened and saw these 5 people cheering and thought, oh my God, what's going on there? Called the police. Now, it's clear they must have had some sort of prior knowledge to be in position to record these attacks in the first place. Now, nobody was cheering those attacks. When I first heard about the 9/11 attacks and planes had gone into buildings, my concern was the people who died on those planes and the people in the buildings who died. I think, God, this was absolutely terrible. What happened there? But these people are cheering the attacks. Now, that is, to me, clear proof that they were involved in those operations.
It's clear.
But what a lot of people don't mention about the dance.
It's clear proof.
What a lot of people don't mention about.
I'm just saying, it's clear proof that there's people on this planet that really aren't very well.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could say there were psychopaths cheering the attack, but again, that's slightly peculiar. But the evidence is there as well. I mean, when you put that into context,
I'm referring to a small stolen state, and saying that how have we got in a situation where we've let utter mentalists gaslight us into believing they're somehow special, so we've got to put up with this shit and we're not allowed to question it. That sorry, I'm venting a bit here, but you know,
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I worked on terrorism, obviously, in Northern Ireland, and if the British Army started launching attacks upon the Catholic community in Northern Ireland, the British people would have been outraged, or certain sections of the British people, because there would have been morons who said they deserve it, but there would have been a whole section of right-thinking people who said you can't go around killing civilians indiscriminately. Similarly, in the case of the British Empire, whenever there was a massacre in the British Empire, there were lots of liberals and churchmen in Britain who made a big song and dance about it to make sure it didn't happen again. But that hasn't happened in the case of Israel. But if we go back to the dancing Israelis, the sniffer dogs detected traces of bombs on a blanket in their van. They had targeting maps. They had tickets to make a getaway. They had false identities. Now, all of these things, and they also lied about where they were at the time of the attacks. Now, all of these things could lead quite clearly to a conviction beyond all reasonable doubt in a court of law. But and they were arrested and they were detained. But it also turned out the company that they were supposedly working for, the company called Urban Moving Systems, the FBI raided their offices. The head of the company, Dominic Suter, is still on an FBI wanted list, an Israeli, for 9/11. They discovered, of course, there was nothing there that was consistent with people making involved with moving people from home to home. It was all obvious front for Mossad. That company was then obviously closed down and its assets were sequestered. So this is all absolute proof that Israel, and the 2 of those men have been alleged to be members of Mossad. So Mossad was involved in the 9/11 attack. And as you said earlier on, we know that there were explosions at the Twin Towers that day. Willie Rodriguez, the last man out of the North Tower, has made that absolutely clear. He insisted on giving evidence to the 9/11 Truth Commission, who did not want to give his evidence. He also said, I've got a whole lot of other people I talked to that day who also heard these explosions that are clearly not the plane going in there before the planes even hit. And the 9/11 Commission just simply refused to hear the other people who gave evidence of explosions that day. So we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Israel was involved in the 9/11 attacks from that point of view. But what a lot of people don't realise, or don't know, is that about 150 Israelis were arrested in the summer of 2001, a couple of months before 9/11. Now, they had been trying to recruit people in the Department of Defense in the US, they were trying to recruit people in the FBI and so on. But the American Drug Enforcement Agency, where they'd also tried to recruit people, had set up an operation to track these people, and they were all arrested, and they all had military or intelligence backgrounds from Israel. And people say, well, all Israelis go into the army, they've got to do military service. But these people had specific military intelligence skills. They had skills in telecoms, for example. So if you're faking calls that come from the planes, that's the kind of skills you need. And then when you do a plotting on a graph where these people lived and operated, these Israeli intelligence officers, it's all around where people are supposed to be connected to 9/11 lived. So what I'm saying is those supposed Muslim terrorists never existed. They were created as patsies for the use of documentation, registering for mobile phones and so on. But they were, in fact, Israelis creating the patsies so that when the attacks happened, they could say, oh, it was these Islamic terrorists and blame them. So we have absolutely clear, beyond reasonable doubt proof that Israel carried out 9/11. Now, when you apply these principles to 7/7 as well, you realize you get exactly the same thing. Netanyahu is warned by Mossad an hour before 9/11 because he's in London that day. That shows prior knowledge of the 7/7 attacks. How did Israel get that prior knowledge? Because Israel was carrying it out. We also have an article that was published in the Jerusalem Post a few hours after the attack. And again, it's like someone got ahead of the script here because the article refers to the attacks being 24 hours previously, and it was published only a few hours afterwards. So this is evidence they had an article ready to go, and it talks about the execution of these perfect terrorist attacks simultaneously. Now, at this point on 7/7, no one knew who'd carried out the attacks. No one knew the timing of the attacks. So that again shows a degree of inside knowledge, prior knowledge to the attacks, indicating that this was Israel. The inquiries of people in the 9/11 7/7 truth movements established that, in fact, the parent company of the company responsible for CCTV on the London Underground is Israeli, basically. And again, with this attack, when you do the forensics or listen to the witness reports, you realize that there are holes in the floors of the carriage with metal pointing upward. Now, it's obviously indicative of bombs being placed beneath the carriages and not being in the rucksacks that they allege they were in with the four men who they hold responsible. So in the case of 9/11 and 7/7, I've worked to say my life has taken in some of the greatest events of world history. At the time, Lockerbie was the biggest terrorist attack in terms of fatalities. It was only superseded by 9/11. The biggest terrorist attack to take place on British soil is 7/7. So in all of these attacks, we realise that there are elements of the British government, and say in the case of Lockerbie it was MI6, I managed to bring MI5 and the British government round to the truth, but in the case of 9/11 and 7/7,
Morning legends, I'm Chris Thrall. I'm a former Royal Marines commando. Upon leaving the forces, ended up chronically mentally unwell, self-medicating, undiagnosed trauma and homeless on the streets of Hong Kong. It was the toughest battle I ever had to fight, but without the support of the medical community, without self-help groups, I learned the answers to rebuild my life and go on to complete a series of extreme charity challenges to send a vital message out there for other veterans who are struggling. I've run the length of the United Kingdom, run across the Sahara Desert, rode across the Atlantic Ocean. Now I'm taking on my biggest challenge yet, climbing Mount Everest. If you can support me, friends, and continue to shine a light for our struggling veterans and let them know that is life after PTSD, I'll put a link below. If you spare a fiver, that's absolutely fine. And let's give our veterans the respect that they deserve. Much love.
This is an extraordinary injustice. And it shows the fact that nobody in government or in parliament or in the mainstream media or the legal system is actually saying this, shows just how powerful the Zionist, what I call nasties, they self-style themselves as an elite, but they're just the nasties. And they, how they have got so much power to get away with this. I am the one who's been persecuted for revealing, in the case of the attack on Gaddafi, then our intelligence services were funding our enemies, people who posed a direct threat to British lives, basically. And that Israel has always posed that threat to British lives, and our government is failing to properly protect the British people.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think the average person in the street has their head getting around the fact that there's operatives out there. I'm referring to a small state now, that literally their job, you know, their day's work, their 9 to 5 is going out knowing they're going to massacre thousands of people, or in the case of London, it's going to be highly, there's going to be civilian casualties, and that it's almost like their Hannibal directive that, hey, you know, there's going to be human costs, but, you know, the small state comes first. Yes, it's. I mean, purely as an ex-military guy, I'm interested. How do they operate? Where do they rock up on a Monday morning and clock in with their colleagues and we're talking people that must be skilled in advanced explosives and communications and this network is vast, David. For them to totally, it's not that simple, was it? What people believe was 9/11 wasn't 9/11. It was what they saw on the television that was pre-recorded and roll camera, roll the video. And so that's why people think about planes is they saw planes because obviously
let's be clear about the plane. Some people have said it's faked video, but Richard D. Hall has fed in the videos into a 3D model, and the videos show consistent flight paths. That would be very difficult to fake with fake videos. What I came to the conclusion, and again, one of the things that happened as a result of my experience. I started off as an atheist liberal. And became a believer, became a spiritual man, a man of God, as a result of my extreme suffering. They say there's no atheists in foxholes. Then Cohen says only drowning men can see him. And that was very much my experience, that when I went through extreme suffering, I saw God. And as a result of that, I got divine revelation. And one day I'd be puzzling over this whole thing with 9/11. Why didn't it make sense? Why do people see planes? But why is the damage to the building so inconsistent with it being hit by planes? I mean, the nose of a plane is made of carbon or plastic. That's not going to reinforce a meter thick steel lattice network and concrete. And then suddenly I had a revelation. It's missiles surrounded by holograms. The missiles may possibly have been delivered by a small US military plane called an A3 Sky Warrior, but nevertheless, that explained all of the evidence. It explained why people saw the civilian jet airliners. When I did the research, I realized that they had the technology to do that. They call the holograms 3D volumetric projection. They have the technology, and I believe that those missiles or planes were actually effectively cloaking themselves in a hologram so people saw jet airliners. And the key to this as well is the fact that very, very few of those witnesses heard planes. Now, the plane was traveling at that altitude. It'd be making absolute racket. So people would be looking around thinking, what's happening? They wouldn't be able to see it because of the skyscrapers of New York. And yet virtually nobody reports that at all. They all report just seeing the plane going in. In fact, there's famous footage of that guy working down below who only looks up when the plane hits the building. So this is clear evidence that these were not jet airliners. And when you actually listen to the Norday brothers recording of the first object going into the North Tower, you realize the whistling sound it's making very, very similar to a missile. Now, similarly at the Pentagon, we've only had 2 pictures released, but if you highlight one of those pictures, you'll see that the object is leaving a corkscrew trail. Missiles leave corkscrew trails. Planes do not leave trails at that level. And then the damage, this thing goes through 6 layers of reinforced concrete to come out of the back of the C-ring of the Pentagon. Again, that level of penetration is clearly something like a Tomahawk missile. May not be a Tomahawk, but it's that kind of US military technology that's not available to Al-Qaeda, not available to insurgents, and clearly shows that elements of the American government were involved in this attack because this kind of military technology was used. So we can say with absolute certainty there is no evidence that planes were used on 9/11, and with a very, very high degree of certainty, we could always say beyond reasonable doubt that missiles were used to inflict that damage, which is technology way beyond the capabilities of Al-Qaeda or any other insurgent group.
So, David, we've covered, we've touched on the events in New York and Washington, London, which is London was it was Manchester, wasn't it, that got Richard D. Hall in trouble. I say in trouble, they came out.
Now again.
Again,
we've had this problem. I've looked at Richard D. Hall's research and incorporated it into my research, showing that, in fact, that the witness reports that day are about somebody going in, putting down something that is what you might call a pyrotechnic device. It flashes. It's not an explosive device. And the one picture that has been published in the media, supposedly of the police dealing with the crime scene, the metadata for that photograph tests to about 12 hours before the attack. Something like that, about 10, 12 hours before the attack. So this is clearly taken from some kind of exercise that was going on that day. So again, we have clear evidence that what we're being told is not true. It's simply not true. We have reports from the police about how this man then escapes in a grey Audi and he is subsequently later arrested. Those actually filmed by somebody and put on social media. So that comes completely at odds to the idea of the official story. But what I found astonishing when I learnt the name of the man was Salam Abedi, it triggered my memory. And I remembered that the agent, codenamed Tunworth, who was the go-between between MI6 and this group of Islamic terrorists in Libya, he belonged to that, was a man called Ramadan Abedi. And it came out in the media that this was Salman Abedi's father. So they have a direct connection between MI6 and the Manchester attack as well. And I say MI6 works to a Zionist brief. It's working towards Israeli interests and not to the interests of the British people. So this is all consistent across the biggest terrorist, trying to falsely implicate the Palestinians in Iran, or MI6 supporting the idea that Muslims carried out 9/11, carried out 7/6, carried out the Manchester attack, when in fact they themselves appear to be playing some kind of role in that. And this, and I've said this stuff to the government, to the media, and nobody seems to want to get to grips with it. I mean, particularly the case, to say, of Ramadan Abedi, the MI6 agent Tunworth, being the father of Salman Abedi at the time. I offered that information. I've offered it to the Manchester inquiry. I've offered it to the Prime Minister of the day, who was at that time was Theresa May. I offered it to Jeremy Corbyn, would you believe, who is a man who has exposed Israel over the years. I offered it to the head of the Met, Cressida Dick, and none of them were prepared to hear the testimony I had to give. Now, that's just out and out ignorance and stupidity, which shows how powerful this Zionist elite is. So the Zionists are clearly foretold in God's Bible, and as the evil people, and they're the people we've got to stand up to. So it's not just Israel and Mossad. Mossad has tentacles everywhere, but it also has the support of the Zionist banking system, the central bankers who control countries through the control of the money supply. And I don't know if you know this, but people, we are now paying $4 billion a week in interest on the national debt to the Bank of England, that we don't even know who it's owned by. It's secret. But we obviously can make some educated assessments from that. And it obviously points to the Rothschild family, who cornered the British economy after the Battle of Waterloo, and are therefore the people who are taking this money out of our society. And to give you an idea of how much money that 4 billion is, the government was trying to cut the benefits of the disabled people and so on to save 6 billion a year. So by withholding that interest payment, I calculated that in 18 months would be the equivalent of all the money earned by Britain's 5 richest billionaires in their lifetimes. So even the left-wing idea that we tax the billionaires will sort this problem out, no, we've got to take that money off the bankers. These are people who are enemies of us. But my research has also shown that the City of London is in fact a separate state from the UK. So the British government is paying 4 billion of your money a week to a foreign power that is oppressing us, that is responsible ultimately for the terrorism going on the planet. How insane is that?
Yes. So, Dave, I don't want to cover the medical scam simply because it's going to get us into trouble. I just want people out there, my audience will get this. When I say the bogeyman physically does not exist, fact, that is called science, I think you know what I'm referring to. Secondly,
yeah, I've done all the in-depth research into the science around pandemics and so on. I wrote an article, would you believe, about 2014 about a program called Utopia, which was then on Channel 4. in which the twist was the virus itself was not the problem, the actual treatment for the virus the problem. That's fictional, yeah? That the government's own data shows us that there are no excess deaths of the pandemic. There are excess deaths at times of lockdown, but we know that was down to what we're now calling the Middlesbrough murders. That the government ordered lots of this chemical, which is used in executions in the US by lethal injection. And we saw this spiking, 17,000 people dying in care homes, which was many times what will be the normal average for that time of year. So we see that the only excess deaths are at times of lockdown. Now, this research is being confirmed across the world by a man called Dennis Rancourt, an academic, who has shown everywhere across the world there were excess deaths during the lockdowns, but not during the times of the normal pandemic, basically.
Yes, I'm just showing up. Sorry, friends at home, the reason I'm looking across is I'm showing stuff on the other screen. I'm not ignoring Dave. I'm just showing the Office of National Statistics itself from 1st of February 2020 to the 31st of December 2021. So I believe that's about a year and a half. How many people died where what I call the scam was the only thing that it was put down to? And basically, under the age of 24, right? Bear in mind, friends at home, they locked the whole planet down and destroyed lives, literally. Under the age of 24, 2 people. You can find this for yourself. Office of National Statistics.
The profile of COVID deaths, the average age of death was actually higher than the average life expectancy. So this behaved exactly like you'd expect the seasonal flu to behave, taking people who were weaker because they were older. And of course, we do also know that according to the official statistics, the seasonal flu disappears at the time. So the vast majority of things that people call COVID were in fact just the seasonal flu rebranded. Now, people have talked about some of the more severe cases of COVID. And again, there is research from academics showing that this correlates to the rollout of 5G in certain countries, that the symptoms that people report from electromagnetic frequencies were very similar to what they are branding as either severe or long COVID, basically. So most of the cases of COVID were simply seasonal flu. The more severe cases were caused by the 5G. And again, they attacked us for being conspiracy theorists and not understanding the difference between correlation and causation. But any intelligent man will tell you, until you've investigated, you don't know whether correlation is causation. You can't rule it out. You can't rule it in either. So the intelligent man looks at a correlation. This is how investigation works, detects a pattern and says, I'll investigate that to see if there's a causal relationship. And when you do, you realize there's a very clear correlation between EMF, and the research we've seen into EMF about how it affects biological mechanisms would be entirely consistent with saying that it is highly likely that EMF and 5G and so on were the cause of the more severe cases of COVID and long COVID.
Yes, absolutely. What I want to come on to, Dave, is David Icke's often saying it's not until you need to learn a lot of these dots in order to be able to join them up. And of course, to the vast masses, no disrespect to the masses, I used to be a member of the masses back along in my indoctrinated days, but they wouldn't understand. Like, to me, the events in New York and Washington and London, and maybe, I don't know, at a pop concert, dare I say. I'm trying to be purposefully a bit vague here. And also, a medical narrative which puts every single person on the planet in their house for the best part of 2 years. It's all the same plan.
Absolutely. People have to understand how the Zionists rule. They understand the nature of true power. Power doesn't come through a vote or a government. It comes primarily from control of the money supply, which, of course, the Bank of England is responsible for. And we know that after the crash in 2008, 2009, the government printed, I think it was about 440 odd billion of new pounds to deal with that problem, when we should have just let the banks go bust. So the Zionists control the money supply through the Bank of England, but they also realise there's other things we need. In modern society, of course, you need oil. Everything works around oil, running your car, heating your home, and so on. So they control the oil industry, but they also need the ability to be able to control the human psyche. And that's where the pharmaceutical industry comes in, Prozac and so on. And these are all part of an attempt to control the human psyche. So if you control the money supply, you control our energy supply, you control pharmaceuticals that control the human psyche. And crucially, of course, the food supply. We all need farmers and the inheritance tax. It's because they want big corporations to take over the food supply so they can starve those who refuse to go along with this nonsense to death. And we've seen this before with this, what I call the Zionist empire. The Zionism, the British Empire was ultimately run by Zionists. They starved to death people in India while they were exporting food. They starved people to death in Ireland while they were exporting food. But we've also seen it other elements of the Zionist empire in terms of the Soviet Union. In the 1930s, when the Soviet Union was saying that socialism or communism was so great, it was exporting grain, even though millions of people were starving in areas like the Ukraine. So people need to understand that these people are out and out psychopaths. They're only concerned with power. They understand the nature of power, which the average man doesn't seem to understand. And they will use these things to literally kill the refuseniks. I have had multiple attempts on my life since I blew the whistle. When I was in MI5, I didn't know about this stuff. It sounds ironic that I thought I was working at the heart of secrecy. But I realized that actually, once I'd blown the whistle, that there was something else going on behind the scenes of MI5 and into other areas. But I can tell you now, I was in 4 car accidents in the years after I blew the whistle. Any of them I could have died in, and I walked out each time without a scratch. Now, that was part of my belief that I was protected by God. Now, I must say, the first of these car accidents was when I'd been picked up from hiding by a black Mercedes owned by Mohammed Al Fayed to be taken to Paris to talk to his security about the death of Diana. And I had this moment that was something like something out of a film where they're playing loud opera on the radio of the car. It's early in the morning, the 2 other people next to me have both fallen asleep. And I suddenly see the driver fall asleep at the wheel. And because the music's so loud, I can't wake him up. I can't reach him because the car's so big. And there is this moment where the car goes off the fast lane of the auto route, hits the central reservation, and we go into the end. And just this moment where I'm thinking, oh my God, this could be it. I'm an atheist at the time. And the car comes back down the carriageway and goes boom like that. And the driver goes boom and wakes up, basically. He then winds his window down and he's fine. Now, the issue of carbon monoxide came up in the Diana, what I would call the Diana assassination, because Henri Paul, the driver, his blood had massive levels of carbon monoxide in it. Now, this is too great to drive, but it may have been that somebody added that carbon monoxide to the blood to at such high levels to cover up the fact that there were lower levels of carbon monoxide in his blood that would have been tested for, basically. And I now believe that when you look at this pattern of false flag operations, I obviously don't have evidence for this, but the most likely candidate by a very long way for the assassination of Princess Diana is Mossad. Now, people would say, why would Mossad assassinate Princess Diana? Well, people don't know this because it's not a matter of public record, but I met Mohammed Al Fayed personally several times as a result of talking to his people about the death of Diana and Dodi. And he told me that they were about to take Diana to Palestine. Now, wherever Diana went, of course, she took the world's media with her. The people of the world would have seen how the Israelis treat the Palestinian people. There would have been world outrage. There would have been an end to the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. So Mossad obviously couldn't allow that to happen. So I believe that there's no other candidate here who could have done this and got away with it in this way, as we've seen consistently with 9/11, 7/7, Manchester bombings. It must have been Mossad. So Israel's responsible for murdering one of the world's most loved women, basically.
So we've outlined the New World Order, Dave. We've joined the dots. It's a dark plan.
There's so many dots now, you don't need... Can I just say, there's so many dots now, you don't need to join them. They make a continuous thing. There's so many of them. And if you can't see it, you're clearly mind controlled. And I don't know if I can say this as well, you might have to cut this out, but there's also clear evidence, well, the Rothschilds, according to the Rothschilds' own website, not the Rothschilds, sorry, the Rockefellers, according to their own website, they have invented what they call a mind control virus. Through genetic engineering, through inserting things like jellyfish DNA, they have created something that can unlock the cell, basically, and can therefore trigger moods. In the experiment they outline on their site, they did it to, I think, induce hunger. But this can be induced to induce various states of being and so on. Now, the only question would be is how would you get that into the population? Well, if you can inject it into people, it's there. Now, the research done by, I think they were called the Citizens Movement 2021, Mark Sexton, they got some of the files of the lab, which they tested. They got an independent lab to test. And one of the things they discovered were tiny nanoglass files. Now, the research shows that you can use the EMF to break open those glass files. So people could now be carrying these glass files that haven't yet broken. But you just do a bang of the EMF on them. And again, I've shown in my research where there's peer-reviewed science to show you can do this. They can then open up that glass file and whatever's in there is then in your system. And this is all I can think at the moment. I mean, recently, I've tried to talk to my brother, very normal person, worked for IBM, sells computers to industry and so on. Family, lives in Surrey. And I have sent him my research and he doesn't seem to know, doesn't seem to understand it. Doesn't seem to understand the importance of this enormous injustice. Now, the only thing I can think, and he's not an unintelligent man, he went to university, he's got a degree, so he should be able to understand this information, is that he has had the and he is now mind controlled. But that, of course, makes a mockery of democracy, of human rights, of freedom. If we have mind controlled people, we're not free, because at any point they could trigger something in those people and turn them into Manchurian candidate style assassins, for example. And we're at risk from that. This is a direct threat to the lives of the British people. So I'm saying to the parents out there, and the mothers in particular, they should be irate about this. They should be on their phone to their MPs every day, their media and everybody else saying, the police, saying this has happened, we're at risk from this, and I want to protect my children, and I'm not going to be quiet until I've got some answers, basically. And until we've done that, we are living under threat. We are living under this ridiculous, what you might call zombie nation in some ways. Indeed, this has been foretold in many, many Hollywood movies and so on. There's so many stories of things like zombies and vampires at the moment. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers film has been remade on many, many occasions across the decades. And in that, the idea is these creatures come and they possess people, and they are therefore mind controlled. They are subject to a collective consciousness rather than the individual consciousness that actually makes you good and connects you to God. So we've seen it all. It's been told to us in what some people will call predictive program. I say it might be God's warnings to mankind. But it's absolutely there. It's everywhere around us, and that's what we're living through at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to come on to this and your philosophy of or your belief in the law of love. A lot on my show, I do a lot of live streams, Dave. I talk to people, and there's people out there are worried, they're scared. We haven't even touched on the whole illegal immigration thing and the plan to destroy the cradle of Europe. But people are understandably scared, and my message is always the same. I found enlightenment in 1998 off the back of chronic addiction, and I've carried it ever since. And when you've got it, it's a hard concept to explain to people that are not there. And I don't mean that arrogantly at all. I'm just saying, how do I explain that for me, everything's perfect and I never have to live in, occasionally you fall into fear. We're human beings having a spiritual experience. That's kind of natural. Occasionally you find yourself, staring at someone's Ferrari thinking, ooh, but, essentially I want for nothing. I wake up every day in paradise. And so I say to people, look, why don't you start like getting what I've got? Because isn't it not a bad deal with all this stuff going on in the world, with these psychopathic maniacs, you know, with their Cabalic New World or Kabbalistic New World Order? Wouldn't it be a good thing if when you woke up in the morning, you was in paradise anyway? So all of that stuff, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then
about Cabala, yeah. Cabala has got a very bad press. The central teaching of Cabala is love your neighbours, you love yourself, which is the law given to us by God in the Bible, basically. Like all things that can be used for evil. I mean, if you look at what Karl Marx is saying about communism, it looks like it would create a utopia. But in fact, it created exactly the opposite. It created government power and the murders of tens of millions of people, particularly in the former Soviet Union and in China. So any system can be perverted by them. And that's why people say they blame the left, they blame the right and this kind of thing. But what is actually happening is Zionism is the ideology above that, taking the worst elements of the right, the worst elements of the left and pushing that upon the people. But this is what I'm saying to people as well. This is a spiritual journey. And I say, I came here as a very, very strong atheist. I describe myself as some way more atheistic than Richard Dawkins, basically, at the time. And I went through this journey, as I say, through attacks on my life, through seeing what the world really looked like. And God really did come to me. He protected me. I say I have many and many attempts on my life using food poisonings, using germ warfare, all of which I've walked away from without a scratch on me. That gave me a certain insight into the world that there's something else going on here. And it's therefore up to everybody, no matter what their circumstances, to adopt that law of love. And what my research has shown is how the law set out in the Bible. Jesus Christ says, I give you two commandments. Love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. On these two commandments rest all of the law and the prophets, basically. That's the only bit of the Bible you need to know, those two commandments. The 10 commandments, never referred to as commandments as such. They are read in the light of those two commandments. So you don't murder people because you don't want to be murdered. You don't steal off people because you don't want to be stolen off. You don't want to discriminate against people because you don't want to be discriminated against. That is all woven absolutely into God's law, basically. But what I've shown uniquely is where that law is recognized as a higher law within their system. Within Magna Carta, for example, the clause that says that you cannot be disseized of your goods or put on trial except according to the lawful judgment of your peers, according to the law of the land. And the principles of law make it absolutely clear the law of the land is synonymous with God's law, and it's about preserving what is called the common good. They talk about the public interest or the national interest. But people who've done their research will realize they're not using interest in terms of our interest. They're using interest there in terms of the interest on the national debt. When they talk about national security, they're talking about security in the sense of collateral, in the same way your house is your security against a loan like a mortgage. That's how they're using those words. So we must always talk about the common good, not the greater good, because that implies the question, whose greater good? The common good is what we should all be serving. And crucially, of course, under the law set out in the Bible, usury is unlawful. This is told in the story of perhaps the most famous story in the most published book in the world, the Bible, is when Jesus Christ goes into the temple and removes the usurers, anybody making money from money. And this crucially obviously encompasses interest, but is not restricted to interest. It's about the handling of money. The people he was throwing out of the temple were not people charging interest on loans. They were people charging interest to convert the local currency, the shekels and so on, into the Roman denarii. So that wasn't even interest. So, but they used that word and they've tried to suppress that word. And of course, usury is the very easiest way of transferring wealth from the poorest in society to the richest. We know that in our own lifetimes, they began to expand usury in about 1970, 71, when the bankers said we'll make loans to people. Now we've got women working as well. You can get a loan, a mortgage based upon the earnings, not just of the man, but also his wife. And as soon as that happened, and they expanded that money supply using usury, house prices went up 40% within a year. 40%. And we now have, of course, it's now led to is extraordinary cost of accommodation, which is the greatest disincentive to any form of entrepreneurialism. In fact, the worry of losing your house because you can't afford to meet the rent or the mortgage is perhaps one of the greatest causes of mental health problems in our society today. So I'm saying if we want to solve these problems, we solve it at source. We take away the funding of the Zionist bankers. We cancel our debts based at usury. And people have got to have the guts to do that. I'm saying have the guts to do that now, even if they might try and break the law and still try and remove it from our home. We need other people who will stand up for the law and try and protect those people. And even if they are thrown out of their houses as a result of not paying their mortgage, they've done the right thing by God, and therefore they can look forward to a glorious eternity. Whereas those who continue to pay these debts at interest, that have put, say, immediate downward pressure on wages. That's why we saw the problems in the 70s. Once you'd have this expansion of the money supply, in terms of the interest I was talking about, in terms of people getting mortgage loans, that put pressure on wages because you've got to find the real money from somewhere. So when you create money, you take it from the pie of real value. Yeah, that put downward pressure on wages. That was what led to the industrial unrest of the 1970s. So it all goes back to these bankers, all of our economic problems, all of our suffering and everything else. But say God's law deals with it. Brave people must stand up and say, I'm not paying these debts. My house is mine. I'm the real user of this property, not the bank. This is my house. And in doing that, we can then start to bring about the downfall of these people. But we will not do it in the way that the left think. The left want to pretend all the problem is bourgeois, business owners. Even small business owners the left hate. Whereas I would tell you, the backbone of any stable society is small business traders and small farmers. You move away from that, they control the supply, and everything becomes more expensive. Small businesses are hundreds of times more efficient than corporations. The man selling his fresh fruit and veg at the market will source things from a local wholesaler. He'll then take that money, he'll spend it in local traders, HR department. He's hundreds of times more efficient. In the Soviet Union, when they took over the farms, I think they were called the Kulak peasants, as a result of the Second World War, the yields from that land dropped. It was a fraction. And we're talking in some cases of single percentages compared to what the peasants had got out of the land. So if you believe in environmentalism as well, you must believe in this law. You must believe in small traders and small farmers, because that's the thing that makes environmental sense. The problems in our environment have been caused by corporations. I say particularly corporations linked to the New World Order of the Zionists. And again, I would say here that the other thing that is, of course, protected by God's law in particular is what is referred to in the Bible as they translate it as the plant of renown. But if you go into the original Hebrew, as I do with all these things, it's the plant of the name, which is what the Jews call God, essentially. So this is the plant of God. And this plant, of course, is the hemp plant. You can make hempcrete out of it that doesn't burn. So your house is protected from being burnt down. You can make ropes from it, but crucially, you get an oil from it. Or you can ferment the actual plant. And it will give you 300 gallons of oil per acre. You can use this to be warming your home. You could use it to run your car off. Henry Ford in the 1930s, 40s, developed a car. Its bodywork was made out of a fiberglass made out of hemp and sisal, and it ran off hemp oil. And of course, hemp is carbon neutral. Why aren't the Friends of the Earth telling us this? Why aren't Greenpeace telling us this? Why aren't the Green Party telling us that the only solution to our environmental problems comes from hemp? Those people who criminalize medicine are sick psychopaths. Sick psychopaths. Why would you deny somebody their medicine, a life-saving medicine? And I say this also applies to people who've turned a blind eye to the dropping of the chemical weapon white phosphorus. I don't know if people know about this chemical. It was used by NATO in Afghanistan. It was used by the coalition in Iraq. And it is also being used by the Israelis on the Palestinian people. This chemical comes down in bits, and it will literally burn through the flesh to the bone. Can you imagine the agony of that? Can you imagine what it was like for those parents in Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, one night going out and seeing the sky lit up, and then, perhaps taking their children out because it's an extraordinary event and seeing those children burning like that? How would any parent feel about that? And I'm saying to every British parent now, imagine that was your child. How would you feel about that? You wouldn't be describing people who've done that as heroes or moral people. Of course you wouldn't. So we live in a totally sick, psychopathic society. And to say the great thing about this law of love is it solves all of those problems instantly if people would adopt it. Now, of course, people have attacked me. They've attacked me for all sorts of reasons. But I know that I can go before God, hand on heart, and say, I have done everything possible to stand up for your law. I have suffered of that. I have been persecuted. I'm kicked out of eco-villages for telling people about the law of love and how terrible it is to drop white phosphorus on people and how the Israelis are terrible occupiers and violent terrorists. And they kicked me out of those eco-villages as an anti-Semite, would you believe? And even when I had nowhere to go. I'd rather do that so I can face God hand on heart and say, I did everything, God. I did everything stand up for your law. And therefore, I don't do it for reward. I do it because I want to stop suffering. That's the only reason. And I know, therefore, I can look God in the face at judgment. But other people will not be able to do that. And I'm warning them now. Obviously, I don't want people to have white phosphorus dropped on them as part of judgment, to suffer because they denied God's medicine in the form of cannabis. But that is coming to them if they do not repent. And that time of repentance may not be too long. Because we know I've been given various codes by God based on the Bible. And the solution to that last code is that within the next week, we may be seeing the final the final end to the age of atonement. Mankind has been judged, and I say as a result, collectively, of what is going on the planet, what governments are doing, mankind is condemned. It is therefore up to every individual man, woman, and child there now to save their own souls. But that opportunity is closing very, very soon. So I say to people, if you want to avoid an eternity of extreme suffering for you and your children, it's time now to show some courage, honour and integrity and stand up for what is right.
Yeah, there's quite a few legends out there, David, aren't there? But there's so much dross. Sorry, I shouldn't refer to my fellow human beings as that, but come on, you got to occasionally, you got to say it. You got to say it as it is. There really are some thick, fucking useless people out there, and they form the majority.
It doesn't take many good. It doesn't take many good people to influence the others, though. That's the point I've realised.
Ah, yes.
One man standing. So I've literally stood alone. I mean, obviously, I've had support from my girlfriend over the years, the odd people here and there. They've then been warned off or dropped me or whatever. So generally speaking, I've been one man standing against a multi-trillion-dollar concern in terms of the funding of the Zionist New World Order. But that one voice from the wilderness, you will not believe how it has actually slowed down at key points the advance of the New World Order and made their jobs much more difficult, basically. If people had come and joined me, of course, we could be living in a glorious world now, but they didn't listen. And I'm not saying that from the point of view of ego, I'm saying it the point of view of the protection of human beings, that because people didn't listen to me when I warned them about MI6 funding Al-Qaeda in the late 1990s, the people who were subsequently blamed for 9/11. Something I haven't mentioned so far in this interview as well was how I came across a document in MI5 written by a senior MI5 officer who had looked at the evidence around the bombing of the Israeli embassy and the Jewish interest section in London in 1994, had concluded that the Israelis had bombed their own embassy. And they then allowed 2 innocent Palestinians to be fitted up for that attack. So if people had listened to these things in the late 1990s, it would have been very difficult for Israel to get away with 9/11. And if they didn't get away with 9/11, they would never have been able to carry out 7. Yeah. So I'm saying to people, listen to me, not because I say who I am. If you want to talk about my stuff, I am the chosen one of God, the one foretold in the Bible, in the Torah, the Jewish books, by Islam, but also by what people would call pagan creeds, the Druids, the Hopi Indians, the Sioux Indians, the Indonesians. This is something that comes across all cultures over all millennia. There will come a time that Arthur, the once and future king, Robin Hood, the man who will return to save England in its hour of need. I am him. Now, people think that's egotistical. The experience I've been through, I've been shown that. There are things in the Bible texts, like the rod of Aaron, the initial letters of the 12 tribes of Israel, just 2 examples, that will show you that someone called David Shayler is either the chief of justice or the just king, or is the divine one, the divine chosen one. That is me. That comes from the initial 4 books of the Bible, One of Aaron is there, the initial of the 12 tribes of Israel. And if you truly understand the nature of creation, you'll realize those first 4 books of the Old Testament, also known as the Torah in the original Hebrew, are the program language of creation. They create all of this around us in the same way the series of ones and zeros on a computer screen allow us to have the conversation we're having now. And therefore, that from that original transmission, it is shown that someone called David Shayler is God's chosen one. I came to this, obviously, through extraordinary suffering, but by being taken to those documents by God. I've never gone looking for my name in documents. God has taken me to those documents. And I've also realized that I am the last incarnation. So, and God only has one incarnation at any given time, so I am the only begotten Son at the moment. But you realize that solutions to things we don't otherwise understand, like the 144,000 I've solved, I have come here 144,000 times. And each time I have learned the way of love and who I am. And as a result of that, it is possible that mankind can accede to the new world. If I hadn't done that, mankind would have been condemned a long, long time ago, not by God, but by its own karma. Karma is a mechanism that means that you get what comes back from your words and your actions, yeah? I've figured these things out. The beginning of creation is a God without form, called all that is. Everything that will ever happen is there, yeah? But that God has all these things going on and suddenly comes up with love your neighbour as you love yourself. I haven't got a neighbour. How can I test that principle? So God creates the world of essence, 2 things that come back together to form the toroid. And in that, there's a process of 2 billion years where God doesn't know who he is. He's finding out who he is. But he sets a mechanism. How do you know that you're loving your neighbour as you love yourself? You get the karma from your words and actions, not your thoughts. They don't affect anybody else. All these people who say, oh, he's evil, he's got impure thoughts. They're sick fuckers. Your thoughts are your own business. That's your own internal universe. But your words and actions affect others. So therefore, that karmic mechanism is the first thing set in place in creation, yeah? That mechanism cannot even be interfered by what we call the one true God now, Jesus. And I didn't get that through the Bible. I got it through Cabala, basically, and the Hebrew, and going back into the ancient texts that predate the Bible. And therefore, that mechanism can't be interfered with by God. All he can do is hold up the karma. This is what we call God's grace. You do something wrong, God says, right, you know, I'm not going to hit you with the karma immediately. I'm a just God. What I'll do is I'll hold up that karma to give you a chance to realize that what you're doing is wrong. And if you realize what you're doing is wrong and you go through true heartfelt repentance, not just, oh, I repent, no. True heartfelt repentance in which you make good what you've done wrong. You perhaps compensate people you've caused harm, loss or injury to. The karmic slate is wiped clean, yeah. But that God takes 2 billion years to realize he is God. Heaven's fifth is the moment God realizes he's God. He then creates the world. God said, bang, let there be light, flash. That is the incarnation of the world of substance that we live in, basically. It's that point that he has designed the world by writing the first 4 books of the Torah, the first 4 books of the Old Testament, the Torah. That is our world of substance. And the 7 days of creation are not 7 periods of 24 hours. When this takes place in the biblical narrative, God's yet to create the sun. So we're not talking about the cycle of the sun of 24 hours. We're talking about 7 universal millennia. The first, I say, is 2 billion years. The rest have taken 13.7 billion years, which is what science says the universe is aged. We are now going into the 7th age of creation, the age of truth and love and peace, basically. All this makes sense in terms of the Bible if you understand how to interpret the Bible. So I've come 144,000 times. Each time, God becomes a soul who sees everything, yeah? He's not omnipotent. Omnipotence can't exist. God cannot create a stone so big he cannot lift it. It's a philosophical impossibility. Somewhere there's a cannot in there, yeah? God cannot create a stone so big he cannot lift it. So omnipotence is impossible. It's a philosophical nonsense. But he is omniscient. He is the source of all power and the source of all energy. And of course, everything that happens here is the will of God. And people say, well, how do you reconcile that with free will? Well, in any given situation, there are an infinite number of possibilities. I can't be Timbuktu in 2 seconds' time. Of course I can't. God sees all of the possibilities that can be made with your free will. But he makes things happen on purpose, yeah? And that's where your free will accords with love. If you choose to reject love, as you can do with your free will, God will let it happen on purpose. But it's still the will of God happening on purpose, yeah? And these 144,000 are people who come off the Jesus soul. Souls reproduce like amoeba, ironically, as above, so below. Binary fission, they separate. In the moment I come off the soul of Jesus, the one true God, I take a cut in consciousness, what's known as the fall. I am cut off from all of my DNA that shows me my past lives, shows me how the universe is created, takes me away from the Akashic record. I come down here as a human being, and I go through the evolution of life on Earth in the womb. In fact, I continue the evolution to man, even in the first 7 years of life. I don't take on the proportions of a human being until I'm 7 years old. I don't generally take on human consciousness until you're about 3. Until you're 3, you have what I would call, you have the capacity for basic language. And this is one of the things that separates us from the animals, that we have complex language. And I was privileged to see this when I was staying with a couple who had a 2-year-old child. I went from that child saying, milk, command language or descriptive language, yeah, to can I have a glass of milk? That's a question in which there are 2 possible outcomes. So from that, we have to be able to concede of an outcome that will not be real. There are 2 outcomes there. Either I get the glass of milk or I don't, yeah? But we have to be able to conceive of that. And that is the complex language we have. In fact, the existence of complex language is, to me, proof of the existence of God. Complex language must predate us. How do you create a complex language without a complex language? Now, say simple language, yeah. I can say, the shirt you're wearing is white. And even if we didn't both know the word white, I'd point to other things and say, well, that's white, that colour, that there. And after a while of the conversation, you'd say, oh, well, he's talking about my shirt being white. We could do that in perhaps a few minutes, but it takes a couple of hours. But how would I even begin to say, well, I love the work of Leonard Cohen. I like the way that he describes the prophecy, for example. Yesterday, I got a bit pissed off with somebody because they bought somebody a beer and didn't buy me one. How would you even begin to start that? How do you have the capacity for complex language here without complex language? The existence of complex language predates us. In the beginning was the word. The scientific equation that scientists are looking for does not exist. It's not in terms of numbers and so on and letters as such. It is language. And the universal law is love equals the law. That is without exception. It operates absolutely everywhere. So the 144,000 are the previous people who came off that Jesus soul before me. Now, we are talking, obviously, the Bible is not a history of a people or a family. It's a history of an incarnation. So people, for example, Adam is the first incarnation of God. And when you look at the Bible, God takes his own life essence to create Adam. He takes Adam's, what they say, rib to create Eve. It's Adam's life force, it's DNA. This is all about genetic manipulation, basically. So generally speaking, the Bible, certainly the people who wrote the vast majority of books in the Bible are written by the incarnations of the one true God, Jesus, and therefore my past lives. And it tells the story of those past lives and how they struggle with goodness and law and everything else. But of course, it goes beyond the Bible. Many, many Egyptian pharaohs are incarnate. And I'm not saying this is the only God, by the way. There's also Mary, there's Gaia, there's Aten or Adonai, basically. These are the prime gods, which take too long to explain how they all evolved, but nevertheless, they are the prime gods. They're the 2 goddesses there, Gaia and Mary. This goddess is often conflated by patriarchal cultures. Like, for example, in the Catholic Church, they will talk about the Virgin Mary and Mother Mary. But these are 2 different goddesses. Gaia is a goddess of love, sexuality, and play. So people in patriarchal, repressive societies like the Catholic Church will try and marginalise that goddess. So they've made Mother Mary and the Virgin Mary the same goddess, when in fact, the Virgin is Gaia because she doesn't incarnate into this world. That's why she's called the Virgin. Mother Mary is a different goddess who's responsible for women's stuff on this planet. But these previous incarnations, Egyptian pharaohs like Thutmose III, like Tutankhamun, In fact, you can translate Tutankhamun as the beloved incarnation of Amun, which is the Egyptian equivalent of Jesus. But it goes on through history. I've traced them back, going back from me, Che Guevara. Now, people would think Marxist revolutionary, that doesn't sound very godlike. Listen to what Che Guevara said. The true revolutionary stands up for truth and justice. The true revolutionary does it out of love. He's telling you the law. We're back to the Sermon on the Mount. Those who stand up for righteousness, truth and justice will find a high place in the new world. Before that, it is Lawrence of Arabia. Before that, it's Mary Kelly, one of the victims of Jack the Ripper, and that was the truth about the Jack the Ripper story. Before that, it's a priest at Rennes-les-Bains. People may have heard about the Rennes-le-Chateau mystery and Berenger Saunier and the peculiar things that happened there in the 19th century. That's what trying to take you down there. So you'll find the incarnation of Jesus was a man called Jean Villers. Before that, it's Percy Shelley, the Romantic poet. Before that is Benjamin Franklin, who wrote words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the common law. Before Franklin, it's William III, who gave us the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Rights. Those are also the law. Anne of Cleves, I missed out. Christopher Marlowe wrote the plays of Shakespeare. You go back before then, I can tell you that there were 3 English kings after 1066, 3 before. The 3 after are King John, who signed Magna Carta, the beginning of constitutional government, Edward III, William III. Prior to that, Alfred, Athelstan, and Edgar. Now, in our culture, it became the incarnation was known as Arthur rather than Jesus, yeah? And that's why we have these different stories of Arthur taking place over 1,000 years. We are, in fact, not talking about the same man, obviously. The Arthur who is buried at Glastonbury is King Edgar. He was the incarnation of Jesus. We have Athelstan, first king of the Britons to be recorded. Alfred, who united England. But before that, we have a man who was a king of Wales, who was the real King Arthur. The man who was Robin Hood lived at the time we now call 1000 AD. So many believed he was the Messiah, because we all know the Messiah didn't come 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, there were 3 Jesus incarnates. One was crucified in 1 BC, called Astronges. He was a Hebrew revolutionary, a farmer who tried to rise up against the Roman oppression. They did crucify him with a crown of thorns and nails because they were making the prophecy come true according to Isaiah, their perverted way of doing that. The one after that is a man called John the Apostle, or John the Divine, the man who writes 3 of the 4 Gospels, the book of John, the book of Luke, and the book of Matthew. The book of Mark is written by Joseph Arimathea, a man who fakes his own death on the cross. The crucifixion we know best, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Last Supper, and so on. The Quran, would you believe? It's confirmed in the Bible. Like the fact that this man, John, who's the incarnation of Jesus, shows you that Joseph Arimathea is a fake Christ by showing you that they induce a coma using hyssop before they put him on the cross. They don't break his legs when they take him down off the cross. They're in on it, basically. It's all a false flag operation, early false flag operation, if you like. One of you will betray me. It's not a prophecy. It's an executive decision. One of them's going to have to go to the Romans to betray him, essentially. But it's all part of the same false flag operation. Judas doesn't kill himself. He's murdered. Because like all people involved in false flag operations, you're the man who knows too much, basically. And after that, Judas incarnation, there's another man called Jesse the Galilean. And that he also obviously, as a Galilean called Jesse, which is very like Jesus, becomes confused with the story of the coming of the Christ 2,000 years ago. But those books in the Bible foretell the coming of the Christ. They foretell the coming of me. And they give indications there as well about my name in the New Testament. Other people who've been incarnated from the Jesus soul include Mark Antony. Cleopatra was an incarnation of Mary. Mark Antony was an incarnation of Jesus. Julius Caesar was an incarnation of Adonai. Augustus Caesar, who was the first emperor, was an incarnation of the Archangel Michael. You realize that history lives in a peculiar way when you realize these incarnations of the gods. It goes back beyond that, obviously. The Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, was an incarnation of Jesus. If you read the Buddha's teachings and you read the Gospels, you will realize but they are saying exactly the same thing about humanity, about its relationship with God, about what you need to do to be a good human being. The followers of the Buddha and the followers of the teachings in the Bible, the churches and so on, the monks, have very different philosophies. But that's because they've taken different parts of those teachings, basically. Confucius was also Jesus. Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, was also an incarnation of Jesus. He wrote the Tao Te Ching as a satire. The Tao Te Ching is a satire on Eastern philosophy and Eastern mysticism, not meant to be taken too seriously. There are good bits in there, but it's not meant to be taken seriously. The same with Plato. Plato was also Jesus. He wrote The Republic, which is what all these Republicans base their ideas of government on. He wrote The Republic as a satire on human life and politics and so on, not meant to be taken literally, basically. So I can tell you about all this stuff. People can say I'm as mad as I like, egotistic as I like, but I've even had past life memories of being the Buddha, past life memories of being Jesse the Galilean when the Romans sacked the temple in AD 70 in Jerusalem, basically. So I know about all this stuff. I can draw upon their wisdom, their philosophies and so on. So I'm saying to people, ignore what I'm saying at your peril. I've warned you about all the murders and everything else and so on. And that judgment is now coming. And if you're not on the right side of it, I don't say worship me, obviously. I've never asked anybody to do that. I say you must obey the law of love God and love your neighbour and you love yourself, because even the one true God, Jesus, is bound by that law. So you are bound by it too. And if you don't, and you suffer terrible, terrible things, that is your fault. It's because of your own words and actions or lack of them. Your cowardice in the face of evil, basically. Sorry, that's how I get off my chest.
No, Dave, it's quite fascinating because life is quite hard enough as it is without having like the rabid press, do you know what I mean? Make you the subject of their venom and they're selling bloody news rags and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we're all free to come up with our own beliefs, aren't we? It's so silly how...
The thing about my things, I can actually at least say that there are these documents where my name is encoded, yeah? So this is not just something going on in my head. Yeah. Anybody can take the original letters of the Rod of Aaron, the original letters of the 12 tribes of Israel, and rearrange them and find my name in there. Now, the sages have long held these things to be. In Cabala, the initial letters of the 12 tribes of Israel are known as the 12-letter name of God, for example. It is said the Rod of Aaron contains the ineffable name of God. So therefore, these have been associated with the name of the Messiah for, at least 2,000 years before my birth. How the hell am I doing that? This is not something that's just happening in my head. The communication has also come. People say, "Oh, is it a voice in your head?" And occasionally it is a voice, but that's really not what convinces me. What convinces me is a series of divine signs that come so thick and fast that they must be way beyond any kind of chance or coincidence. And once you enter into the true consciousness, when you live under love, you retune the programming of your brain. And I say to people, it's like having a radio receiver or transmitter. That, if I'm listening to Radio 1, I can't hear Radio 2. If I change the frequency I'm receiving on by going to Radio 2, I then hear Radio 2. It doesn't mean to say Radio 1's not broadcasting anymore. It's still broadcasting. I'm just not on the right frequency. And that's the same thing with the spiritual journey. If you're truly on the journey, and I don't believe people like born-again Christians are quite often. These sort of real, I've given up alcohol, I've given up tobacco, I'm now God. It's not what defileth a man. Sorry, not what goes into a man's mouth that defileth him. It's what comes out, i.e. you're judged on your words. And what goes in generally is not what will cause you the harm. That the Bible says moderation in all things. That substance, obviously Jesus didn't exist in a time of the kind of toxic food attitude you have now and so on, but I would also suggest that living at that level of consciousness provides protection against diseases like cancer and dementia. When you're in the lower vibration, the love vibration is going like that. It's constantly interacting with DNA. In fact, your DNA, I believe, is a transmitter and receiver of light. And this is, in fact, how we don't die. That diseases are, in fact, caused by toxins. And what we have to do is create the enzyme, like a lock and key device. Got a new toxin, this can cause us damage. But our DNA evolves to create the new lock. It neutralizes that toxin by creating a new shape to fit that toxin, yeah? And what happens is we then share that with other people through the DNA, through people who we associate with and so on. So when they get the toxin, they've already got the thing to neutralize it in their bodies, basically. It works on that level. And that makes far more sense in terms of how diseases are spread than what we're told by modern medical science, basically. So this is all about, say, the idea of the lock hits your DNA at high frequency. You're living in high frequency, you're developing your own DNA. You're living in lower frequency, in what I would call the base emotions of anger and hatred and jealousy and self-pity. You're on this wave. You're not touching the DNA all the time. That's all I can describe as a physical reason why these things happen, basically. But yeah, so and of course we also know we're cut off from about 90 to 95% of our DNA, basically. And it's in that DNA that we record all of our past lives, that we have access to the true human history laid down in what's called the Akashic record, basically. And believe me, modern academics are nowhere near the truth about the world. In the same way, as I say, we've got to be extremely skeptical about history if in our own lifetimes, in a society of mass communications and supposed representative government, we can have the exact opposite of the truth about 9/11 and 7/7. What does that mean for history?
It's all coming out now, though, Dave. If you go on things, like Twitter or X as it is now, there's massive platforms dedicated to exposing just when we thought, oh, hell, did they get away with it? No, even Tucker Carlson cannot avoid it from his, I think it's from his moral conscience, is he's got to say, guys, there's a building there, didn't get hit by anything. When are we going to why are we so deluded we can't say, oh, hang on, that building didn't get hit, and it's just gone, woof. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
No, we are waking up. People are waking up, you're absolutely right. Yeah. There's been this gradual awakening. People in the New Age will still talk about their love and peace, man. And I'll say there's a couple of stages you've got to go through before you can have that love and peace, yeah? And that is standing up for truth and justice. If there's no truth, there can be no justice. And if there's no justice, you will not have peace. You will have a constant conflict. Once you have that truth and justice, you can have peace. And once you have peace, you can have freedom. The first casualty of war, of course, is truth and freedom. Immediately, there'll be propaganda, and they'll suspend the laws that guarantee freedom. So you must have the courage to stand up for truth and justice before you can talk about love and peace, man. And I find the New Age is toxic. A lot of it has a hatred of the Christian religion, which I agree with. I despise churches. Churches and communists, evil people, basically, because they put the group consciousness above the individual consciousness, which is what you use to connect to God. And then we all know as well that I don't know if you know, well, I say we all know, I know from my own research that the modern New Age philosophy was created by something called the Lucifer Trust.
What was it called, David? You just phased out then.
Affiliated to the UN in 1947.
What was it called, Dave?
Called the Lucifer Trust.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
The Lucifer Trust. Yes, the Lucifer Trust. Obviously, Lucifer is a figure widely held to be a figure of Satan. And I will tell you that I know from my own research that Lucifer was one of the archangel incarnations of the goddess Mary. The incarnations of the goddess Mary have opposed the incarnations of the God Jesus. And again, in my own life, and I can point you to documentary evidence for this. People won't have heard of the 72 names of God, but they are the first things in creation. Once you understand the Hebrew, you realize the Bible opens with the line, in a rush, God created the names. And these are the 72 names of God that are alluded to in the Gospels as the 72 disciples. They are the 72 virgins in heaven of Islam. They are 3 letters. Three-letter words, yeah, in Hebrew. And they encapsulate certain types of human consciousness. When you're put in a table and you go to the center of that table, you create a compass and a square. And we've heard of compass and square before in the context of these things, obviously. You take the whole letters around that compass. You finish up with Annie Mashon, Dave Shayler, Shoe. And again, you know, I was taking these things. I didn't go finding. You know, Annie Mashon's obviously my ex-girlfriend. She was the incarnation of Mary. The only time in my life I've ever met a woman, and instantly after meeting her, thought, I'm going to go out with that woman. It was Annie Mashon. We had a very, very close relationship, a relationship that very quickly bonded. And I would suggest this is the case with all people. Everybody has the experience where you can meet somebody and meet them for a day and almost feel like you've known them for a lifetime, yeah? And you can meet other people, you can sit across a desk from them at work for 3 years and think, I still don't know that bloke. And I believe that's because you're connecting with them at a soul level. You've come across them in previous lifetimes. And I went out with Annie on many other occasions. Adam and Eve, Samson and Delilah, Anthony and Cleopatra, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, Arthur and Morgan. These are all situations where we've come together before. But nevertheless, I say that Mary exists. Lucifer, therefore, is the incarnation of Mary, and in that sense is the opponent of Christ. And the Hebrew word for opponent or adversary is Satan. So the Lucifer Trust is putting out a false version of spirituality, and that is what has underpinned the New Age. I've lived on eco projects and see people spouting this kind of dark New Age philosophy that they think is somehow goodness. And I say to all of those people, I say, you talk about love, but does your philosophy make love the law? And they go, no. I said, well, mine does, uniquely. It says that love is the paramount and mandatory thing. Yours doesn't say that. And that's why my philosophy is superior to yours, because it makes love the law. And I say we've seen that really in the history of this country. It's that love your neighbour, you love yourself principle that has run through the history of this country, that's enabled us to remove despots, enabled us to essentially behead a king at one point because he was getting ideas above his station. It's enabled us to keep Parliament in check at times. It's only because people have lost touch with that love your neighbour principle that we are now living under the evil we live under, in which people are enormously exploited and they are sick. You know, say in a society in which 1 in 2 people are getting cancer, that cannot, by any estimations, be a good society. But as I say, it's up to people to show the courage to adopt the love your neighbour principle. So, yeah.
Dave, you're obviously a multifaceted character. You're into a lot of areas of life that are, you know, unique to you. When you think the average person in the street, if I can use that expression, they're fairly sort of linear. Kind of what you see is what you get. Can you explain? And I honestly don't mind if you don't want to talk about it. I'll even edit this bit out if you want. But the whole occasional tranny thing is this is not something. My only sort of understanding, and I've worked with transvestite people, absolutely lovely, obviously no stigma whatsoever. I find it kind of. I find it a bit strange. I wonder if anyone's ever said, look, my love, or mate, probably mate wouldn't go down well, but you're pretty fucking ugly and you're not going to pass this off. That I'm being flippant here for the sake of saying probably what a lot of people think. And
about certain trannies, yeah, of course. I like to think that I look okay. Certainly when I was younger, I think you can see pictures when I came out in the Daily Mail, even when I had a terrible wig because I couldn't afford a decent wig, but still have a certain passability, shall we say. I'm not saying I ever pass as a woman. I don't want to be a woman. Never wanted to be one at all. But I must say as well that the whole Dolores thing, which is my femme name, Dolores Kane, came to me before, again, when I was an atheist. I dressed in women's clothing, wearing my mum's stuff as a kid. When I was at university, I'd secretly well, my girlfriend's sexy, sexy lingerie, stuff like that. And I got a sexual thrill from it. I'm not going to deny that. It's not a fetish, though. If I only had sex like that, it'd be a fetish. But I've carried on having a normal, healthy sex life, and that then became part of that healthy sex life with Annie, where the character of Dolores was formed. Got the name, would you believe, from when I was at university. There was this woman that used to work for the student newspaper who was dyed blonde hair, used to wear loads of makeup and a low-cut top. And there was one day she was walking up across the bar, and my mate goes, "Oh, look, here comes Dolores Delightful." And I laughed. And then when I wanted to take a femme name, I thought Dolores sounded quite good. Thought that sounded too queeny, so I took the name Dolores Kane. Now, this is also part of the prophecy. If you study the esoteric, you will realize there are three things called the Dolores strokes. Now, Dolores is just the anglicized version of Dolores from the Latin. It means suffering or pain, basically. Christ, as we know, famously walks up the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. It shows that actually the way we activate spirituality is much more by suffering than anything else. So it's got that metaphorical meaning. But there are three Dolores strokes. They're all fictional. The first Dolores stroke is the lancing of the side of the biblical Christ on the cross to prove that he's dead. The second Dolores stroke takes place with Arthur in the Arthurian legends with the Fisher King. And it's said that he's wounded either in the top of the leg or the genitals, basically. That's said to be the second Dolores stroke. It's said that the third Dolores stroke, remember Dolores Kane here, stroke of the cane. Well, Kane is my femme surname. It said the third Dolores stroke will happen when the end times are about to begin. Now, in the year 2000, I wrote a novel, which I have self-published. Couldn't get any publishers to publish it. In that novel, I also called the heroine Dolores Kane. She is, in fact, a woman, but I use the name there as well. And this is before I know the esoteric, and I'm still an atheist, I write this book. In the narrative, at one point, she has the hero tied up in bondage and gets a knife out to threaten him. And she puts it in his leg. So there's an injury in the leg of the hero of the novel. But from the context of the narrative, you're not sure whether she tried to cut his knob off, basically. Now, this is a 500-page novel that I sent to the Guardian and said, look, I've got this novel, I want to get it published, perhaps you give me some publicity. And they chose to publish 2 extracts of that novel from a 500-page novel. One of the extracts they chose to publish, I think it was the 5th of July 2000, was the passage I've just described to you, where Dolores Kane puts a knife into the hero's leg. This is the third Dolores stroke that is foretold, yeah? It's a fictional, like the other two, as I say, it's fictional. I didn't realise at the time, so I didn't understand any of this stuff. But in fact, from context as well, what is really weird is after she's put the knife in his leg, it describes the blood running down his leg as like oil from a Castrol can. And we all remember that, I think that 70s advert where I don't know if you remember it, you're old enough to remember it, but there was an advert of Castrol GTX, all it was a tin of Castrol and the oil slowly coming down the can, yeah? It's called Castrol GTX. There are 72 names of God, but God also asked you to find the hidden name of God. If you go to the 72 names of God, there's one letter that's missing. That's the Hebrew letter G, which means divine. The letters that then appear the least are Tet and Zardek. GTX is the unwritten name of God you must figure out on the spiritual journey. Castrol GTX, but it's unwritten. So in the actual narrative, it just says down a Castrol can. It doesn't say Castrol GTX. It's still the unwritten name of God there in that text that I say I wrote long before I knew about the esoteric or any of this stuff. That was July 2000. That was published, the third Dolores Strokes. It happens when the end times are about to begin. On the 21st of August 2000, I returned to the true Holy Land. This is the Holy Land here, not that benighted piece of land in the Middle East. There was a migration east before we migrated back west again, yeah? And in that migration east, people settled, but they took the names of places from the Holy Land. That's in the same way that people, when they went to the States, called places Newcastle and Birmingham and Boston. They named the towns after where they've come from, yeah? So this here is the true Holy Land. In Hebrew, the word Brit means covenant. We are the Britam. the Briton, the people of the covenant. This is the true Holy Land, the British Isles, basically. So the Messiah, before he realizes the Messiah, returns to the Holy Land on the 21st of August 2000. Now, the Bible says that Christ spends 3 days in hell. He's crucified at the end of the first day and ascends on the third, yeah? You know that story from the Bible? Biblical units are notoriously difficult to understand. They'll never be literal. You've always got to think what unit works here. And I struggled. I was thinking, what the hell is this? Is it months? What is it? Years? And then it suddenly came to me. It's the unique biblical unit. In the Bible, there's a period of 7 years called the Jubilee. Yeah? 3 times 7 years takes you from the 21st of August 2000 to the 22nd of August 2021. On the rod of Aaron, where my name is, you can use the Hebrew letters slightly differently to decode a date. That date comes out the 22nd of August 2021, basically. So we have exactly 3 jubilees from the return of the Messiah on August the 21st, 2000, to the date in the Bible. And so this comes from the original Torah, the original date of transmission. Even if you don't accept that, it's a date that can be easily decoded from the rod of Aaron from many years before my lifetime. That is the beginning of the 7th age, that date there, yeah? Christ is crucified at the end of the first day. That first period of 7 years will take you to August 2007. On the 29th of June 2007, I was formally anointed by God in a week I will call Holy Week. People need to look at my research on the Book of the Law and look at the real meaning of Easter week. But to cut a long story short, I have a night, which I now call my Nessun Dorma night, Nessun Dorma. I'm not a fan of Italian opera, but like everybody else who's a football fan, I remember it from the Italian 90 World Cup. That opera tells the story of a king who is up all night, who is awaiting a decision on which the fate of the realm rests. I was told by God the night, the 28th of June, 29th of June, that I would be up all night. That night, I am meditating. I am physically attacked by the dark side in a way I've never been before or since. I can literally feel presences trying to push me over, trying to enter my body. And all I'm doing is meditating all the time, thinking of love, faith in God. You didn't have faith in God, something like that would drive you insane, for Christ's sake. And at one point I have this moment where I think of a painting. I painted when I was 18 with chessboard in perspective on it. I then being up all night, go to see my friend. My friend actually is the current incarnation of Adonai or Arton, the last incarnation. A man called Adrian Connick. I met as a result of 9/11 Truth. His previous incarnation was John Lennon. And he says to me, he said, did you sit? And I was meditating at one point during this meditation. I'd been told to clear the darkness out of London. So I did the meditation, Cabala for clearing the darkness. And I get to his place. First thing he says to me, he said, did you see that bomb didn't go off in London last night? Oh, bloody hell, I was clearing the darkness out of London. But I was clear for a very long time. Next item that comes up on the telly in the background, we've now established that a bomb was driven across London last night, separate to the other bomb that didn't go off. Thinking, bloody hell, that can't be a coincidence. I've been clearing the darkness out of London, the bomb didn't go off. And then he says to me, did you see that a crop circle appeared yesterday? I said, really? I haven't seen it, no. And he turns it round and it's a chessboard in perspective, like when I painted when I was 18. I said to him, I suddenly realised that was my sign. Before I could say anything, he showed me another image of the crop circle on which somebody had superimposed the Last Supper, because it had these pillars going back that could be matched to the Last Supper painted by Leonardo da Vinci. I knew that was Leonardo da Vinci in a previous life. So that's the moment I say, that's my sign. It's me. I'm the Messiah. I've known this all my life, but I've only just realised it. At that moment, all I can describe is the heavens opened. I did what is called the Kabbalistic cross meditation. And part of the Kabbalistic cross meditation is you finish up making the crucifix yourself with your body. You stand there with your arms out wide, you are a crucifix. That is the crucifixion of the Messiah. It's a metaphorical idea. The crown of thorns are a metaphorical idea that once you become the Messiah, you become the king of planet Earth. But it's a crown of thorns because you have no power to be able to enforce your authority in your office. That is the meaning of the crown of thorns, basically. But at that moment, I go through, and it's also, of course, the Last Supper, no grain on the table, Jesus and either Mary John leaning apart, pointing to an empty chair that's the other side. In a Passover supper, they're waiting for the return of Elijah, supposedly. Christians are supposedly waiting for the return of Christ, even though he didn't come 2,000 years ago. I'm looking from that point of view. There is no grail on the table because I am the grail. The sang real, the sang real. They're not the holy blood, it's just the southern accent, the long dock accent way of saying sang real, the holy true one, basically. So that was the crucifixion at the end of the 7 days. In 2020, just before the pandemic began, I went through the ascension process, in which I went through a similar awakening process that I'd been through in 2007. So that I also went through the ascension on the 3rd day, as told by the prophecy. People might say, why haven't things changed? Well, the book of Daniel foretells the 1,335 days of patience. And 1,335 days off the 22nd of August 2021 brings you to the 17th of April this year. Maundy Thursday this year, the day before Good Friday. Symbolic dates. There are some other codes you've got to work out, which I'm not going to explain here, but it basically comes out as around about December the 14th, 15th this year is the final closing of the Age of Atonement and the supposed beginning of the New Age. So all this ties up in terms of my journey. I can, people can have a go at me about this, but it's all there. It's all there in terms of those who have eyes to see, those who have ears to hear.
It's a bit hard, isn't it, to detach from the material and be spirit, because we're so programmed what other people think. It'd be great to just have a total spiritual mechanism that you can go like that and switch it off. And a lot of, the big sort of speakers out there, observers, they say, I don't care what people think, but I think it's a bit hard when you're a human animal, that it's kind of in our DNA is to be accepted by the pack, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the point is that to survive, particularly in our kind of climate, you need social cooperation. That's the thing. You can't be, and again, the difference between the Eastern tradition of spirituality and the Western tradition is that the East puts a premium upon, shutting yourself away in the temple or in the woods and meditating by yourself. The Western tradition of Cabala says that actually we learn spiritually through engagement with others. We're going to truly know who we are through interacting as a social creature.
Yeah.
But we have to balance that also with our need to get away from the group, not be dictated by the group, and have those moments of individual connection to God as well, basically. So the Western tradition does deal with that. But I even say, people say you've never performed miracles. I say miracles happen here every day because I'm here. You just don't notice. If I wasn't here, it'd be a hell of a lot worse than it is. But I would say that when I used to have these people doing these astrological things for me, I was an atheist. They'd say, according to your stars, you're a deeply religious person. I said, well, that just shows it's all bollocks. Depends how you're defining religion. Are you defining religion as that which binds you together with God again from the Latin, or that which binds you with other people? That I would argue that my religion was Middlesbrough Football Club. And therefore, I have a deeply personal moment as well. Again, I can tell this story. It's truly remarkable. I've been a Middlesbrough fan at this point for 40 years. Middlesbrough have done nothing. They're a team they're not a rubbish team like, Aldershot or something like that. They're a team that's always promised to do something, generally been in the top flight of English football, or at the top of the lower flight. And there comes this moment when, I don't know, I can tell you the whole story. Let's tell the whole story. You can cut it out if you want. I'm going to tell you the story. I've started to become spiritual. I know the date, the 27th of December 2004. Didn't know this at the time, but that's John the Divine's Day in the Christian calendar. Didn't know that, but know that now. And I had a result of what happened is I'd been reading about Cabala, but I'd also been reading Stephen Hawking, Brief History of Time. And what I've taken from this is the three core concepts of creation in Cabala and in quantum mechanics are the same. Cabala says there's a flash of light from which all substance comes. In quantum mechanics, that's the explosion of a single atom. Cabala says we live in a realm that's 1% light, 99% darkness. Quantum mechanics says we live in a 1 to 5% observable world. The rest is dark matter. And that we, on the tree of life in Cabala, there are 10 spheres attached, one not attached, which is a disk. Quantum mechanics, Stephen Hawking says, we live in a realm of 10, possibly 11 dimensions. So the core concepts of creation are the same in Cabala as they are in quantum mechanics. My interest, of course, was the fact that the mystics had known this for thousands of years, and the quantum physicists had just discovered it. So that was why I made a conscious decision on the 27th of December 2004 to become a spiritual being. And I remember I've got the names of God, been doing lots of research into the esoteric. I knew there was a secret in the esoteric that no one else had actually solved. And I knew I was making progress towards that secret. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I was making progress, yeah? So on the 27th of December 2004, I have this moment where I formally go on the journey. I say, right, okay, my life's a mess at the moment. I can't get anything sorted out. I've been persecuted by the other side. I'm trapped on this island in the Blackwater estuary. I can't do anything. I can't even get into London and stuff. Got no money. Let's take a punt. Let's try and believe that love is the guiding principle, that there is some kind of force out there that has our best interests at heart in that moment. And therefore, I start to practice Kabbalistic meditations using the names of God and so on. A few months later, Middlesbrough playing away at Manchester City. This is before Man City were big. And the situation is, the last game of the season, we've got to draw at Man City to get into the UEFA Cup for the second time. If we lose that game, Man City win, they go above us in the league. So they go to the UEFA Cup instead of us. All the other games are finished in the Premier League. And they say, oh, we get the City of Manchester Stadium. I'm thinking, oh, it's all over. It's nearly, I can't remember one each or nil each. We were going into Europe. They say, oh, no, we've got last minute drama at the City of Manchester Stadium. Manchester City have got a penalty. I'm thinking, oh, God, no. Now, this moment, I think, right, this Cabala stuff works. If you can call upon God and influence real events, let's do it. So I meditate for the name of God. Absolute certainty this ball's not going to go in the back of the net. Boom, keeper saves it. Obviously, my rational mind still says that's a coincidence. Could be a coincidence. Don't talk rubbish. All the way through this UEFA Cup run. Now, people who don't know Middlesbrough, they're to say a team that promise a lot. They've never played this high before in football. Never played. They got the UEFA Cup before and they got knocked out early on. This time they're playing at a higher level. We're 1-0 up from the first leg. We're playing in Rome. This is in the last 16. We go 1-0 up. I'm doing this meditation. God, this bloody works. And then, of course, I stop for a second, getting casual, start thinking about the next round. Stop living in the moment, of course. You'll be in the moment. And they scored 2 quick goals. This means it's 2 each on aggregate because we still go away through on away goals rules. I literally start this meditation again. This team were in front with open goals, a striker's falling over his bootlaces. Ball magically swerves away from the goal mouth, things like this. And watch this thinking, this is way beyond what I can think is chance, but still within the realms of chance. We then get into the quarter-final, yeah? We're 2-0 down from the first leg. We're playing one of the best teams in Europe, basically, a Swiss team called Basel. I'm thinking, well, I'll go there and do this Cabala thing. After 20 minutes, they score, so we're 3-0 down. I have this moment where I turn around to God and say, okay, we've done some of this. I don't know if I can ask for a sign off you. I don't know whether that's blasphemy or heresy. But I'm turning around to you now saying, if you are there, I will meditate love for the next 70 minutes. And if you are there, we will win this game. But, and this is meditating love, bearing in mind, football, the opposition, all this kind of thing. You hate the referee, you hate the opposition fans, you hate the opposition players. So I've got to love the opposition players, I've got to love the opposition fans, love the referee. And I do. And Middlesbrough play football like the 1970 Brazilian World Cup winning team. I've never seen anything like it before. But it comes to the light with 3 each, yeah? Now, obviously, again, they've scored an away goal, so they're going through at 3 each. In the very last minute, the metaphor of the Dead Sea, of the Red Sea rising as the Israelites tried to cross it, yeah? It's only when it gets right up to their noses that God parts the Red Sea. It's like that. It's just in time, God does. In the last minute, player scores 4-3. I have this moment where I connect to the divine. I don't quite know what's going on. I'm standing in this football stadium thinking, God, that is absolutely amazing. That's a miracle. I do talk about the feeding of the 35,000. God feeds 5,000 in the Bible with 2 fishes and 5 loaves. 7 times 5 is 35,000. The attendance that day in what can only be described as a modern cathedral, a football ground, lit up at night with the light. But that wasn't the miracle, would you believe? In the next round, we're now playing the semi-final of the UEFA Cup, way above where we played before, playing Slow Bucharest. First leg, they win 1-0. I go there, bit cocky, of course, thinking, well, meditated them through last time, we're only 1-0 this time, should be easy. 20 minutes gone, they scored 2 goals with 3-0 down again. God teaches me these lessons about cockiness. None of this happens because of you, it happens because I operate through you. Don't get ideas above your station. So I think, yeah, okay, we'll do the same thing again, yeah? God says, yeah, okay, we'll do the same thing again. This time it's slightly different. I'm not just meditating over the name of God for love. I'm meditating other names of God. I can feel the darkness is now upon me. They've seen my light out there. They're now attacking me. They're using their dark forces to try and stop this happening. But again, we score 1 goal back. But then I'm thinking, we've only got 1 back. The equivalent time in the quarterfinal, we got the 2nd goal. And I thought, God, because of this evil eye, I must remove the evil eye. I do the name of God for removing the evil eye. Within a minute, we've scored. Like, this is just incredible. But then again, we go through it again. We score another goal as well. We've got 17 minutes to get the winning goal. With 3 each again. We're going out again on away goals rule, unless we score again. We've got 17 minutes to try and score that goal. We get nowhere. In the very last minute, one of the best strikers in Europe can boot the ball into Rosé. He doesn't, he slices it, goes out to our winger, whips it in, boom, we score. And this time it just all goes white, yeah? When I come to, I've involuntarily made the position of the crucifixion like that, standing in the ground. The crowd are chanting, E-I-O, E-I-O, E-I-O. We're the only crowd that chant that, basically. No one else chants it. When I was Borough fan, I used to ask people, why do we chant E-I-O? People have got no idea. EIO can have 2 meanings. It can be a way of chanting the first name of God after the unwritten name of God is can be chanted as EIO. It's the name of God for simply being, having no expectation, basically. But it can also be a way of pronouncing the Tetragrammaton. People know the Tetragrammaton in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Bible, the name of God is sometimes translated as IHVH. That can be translated as I-E-O-E. Yeah. Sorry, as E-I-O. Yeah. So I asked God for this sign in the quarterfinal. We win 2 games, 4-3 coming back. I can in 2 consecutive rounds of a cup competition anywhere in history. So this is clearly beyond the norm. When it's Middlesbrough, it's even more beyond the norm because Middlesbrough is the sort of team that snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, basically. And so in this moment, I have 35,000 people chanting EIO. They're chanting God's name at me, the God that I am talking to, basically. That, to me, in that moment, I believed in God in my heart. By meditation. And obviously I'm tapping into the psyche of 35,000 Middlesbrough fans there who want the same thing, obviously. And that's what partly gives it its power. But I realised in that moment that there is something going on way beyond reason, way beyond the norms of probability. And that was the moment I believed in God in my heart. I abandoned my religion of Middlesbrough Football Club and realised that spirituality and love were the true way forward. Now people will say, why didn't you win the final? We lost 4-0. And I say to people, God told me it's not about the silverware, it's about the experience you've just been through. If you think the silverware is important, you're not my son. And so that day, I parted with my religion. I went to Eindhoven, and I got pissed, as I used to do before football games, going out with a few lagers and things. Alcohol cuts you off from the divine. So even where I experimented with it in the final, it simply didn't work because I cut myself off. And that's absolutely right to say it's not about bits of silverware, the material. It was about that divine experience. So, yeah, all I can say to people is that all of my stuff, it goes through the Dolores stuff, it goes through my religion of Middlesbrough Football Club, and football is God's game, basically. And again, I'm not joking about this. Half a football pitch, you've got Solomon's Temple. Yeah, the actual half circle you get like that is 2 doors opening like that. Yeah, that's the semicircle you get in the middle. Penalty area, the Holy of Holies. The goal area is the altar. The net represents the crypt beneath the Temple of Solomon, where the Ark of the Covenant's kept, of course. Yeah, you play football for the control of a white sphere. At the top of the tree in Cabala is a white sphere. Yeah. And of course, in football, you have 10 outfield players and 1 player who has special powers, yeah? The goalkeeper. So you mirror creation, as I was saying. You have 10 spheres in the tree of life, 1 not attached to the disc. But the goalkeeper only has special powers in the Holy of Holies, like the high priest. The high priest was allowed to say God's name in the Holy of Holies. He wasn't allowed to say it anywhere else. Once the goalkeeper's outside the penalty area, he can't handle the ball. But football also mirrors spirituality in terms of discipline. Spirituality is about having a discipline to overcome the baser emotions, and not let anger and fear and hatred colour what we do and our opinions and so on. In football, in a ball game, our instinct is to catch a ball with our hands and throw it, yeah, like in all other ball sports, yeah, American football or rugby or Australian rules football. It's all about catching the ball and throwing it. Football teaches you to discipline your body to overcome that instinct, so that you can take the ball down your chest or your thigh. So it therefore is a metaphor for the spiritual journey in terms of discipline as well. That is why football is the most popular thing mankind has created by a very, very long way, basically. It dwarfs any religion. It dwarfs anything that we do on the planet. It is what truly unites human beings. In fact, I remember watching a documentary about the 1994 World Cup final, where what they'd done is they'd got people across the documentary makers across the world had taken their cameras into ordinary places like bars and living rooms and so on to see people's reaction to this World Cup final. They even had it in Africa with an African chieftain watching on television they brought to him. And at one point, his wife gets in front of the television screen and he goes, "Out of the way, woman, I'm trying to watch the football." He's a black African chief. He's grown up a completely different culture from me. At that moment, I know that feeling. My girlfriend's standing in front of the football. "Get out of the way, woman, I'm trying to watch the football." Brings us all together as human beings, basically. So football really is the God's game in every way possible. It's the beautiful game. It's when it's played properly, it looks like ballet. It requires grace and skill and everything else. And you always say, somebody like Wayne Rooney. Wayne Rooney doesn't strike me as being a particularly bright bloke. Looks a bit like an Irish potato farmer. But he's blessed by God to play football with the grace of a ballet dancer. It's truly extraordinary to have that strength, poise and skill, but also the teamwork, the almost telepathic understanding that certain footballers have. Obviously, I'll talk from my age a long time ago. People used to talk about Keegan and Toshak, for example, for Liverpool. Players who seem to somehow be able to play together on a level that's not to do with normal human interactions, basically. So it brings that out as well, the telepathic communication we have as human beings, like I say, we get from our soul connections. So yeah, so what I try to do with all this spirituality is it's not highfalutin, it's not new age, it's not about wafty ascended masters and all this kind of thing. It's about being a human God man and recognizing your humanity. The Buddha foretells the final incarnation of the Buddha as being a very human God man. And I would say that, I have that humanity about me. I understand. I haven't eliminated my emotions. If I'd eliminated, I'd become a psychopath. Of course I would. I've mastered those emotions. I still get them, but I master them. I realize that by meditation and by my connection to God, I can still act in love by rising above anger and hatred. And that's, again, what human beings have got to learn, and particularly women, I believe. But that's another story. Let's not get onto that one. I've probably offended enough people already.
Dave, on that note, I'm just going to thank you ever so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on coming through all excuse my profanity, folks, but all the shit that you've come from, bloody hell. Yeah, keep at it. And I see you got a guitar in the background. Can you play it?
It's not mine, it's my girlfriend. She's very proficient at singing and the guitar. She had a brief kind of career doing pub gigs when she was younger. Music has generally been a closed book to me. About the age of 16, I used to write poetry, and I thought, like, if I could set these lyrics to music, a bit like Leonard Cohen, perhaps I could make a career out of my poetry and music. And I picked up a guitar, and it took me 6 months to learn to tune the guitar, and then only by actual vibration rather than actually hearing notes properly. I have no musical ability, but this is what I argue as well, and science is now accepting this as well, is that conscious not in there. There's all sorts of consciousness bubbles out there that pre-exist us, yeah, and you have a bubble for musical ability. Now I'm connected to that bubble, but by a very, very fine thread. But the bubble, for example, for public speaking or writing, I've got a very strong connection with that. Obviously, we can increase those connections through what we do in terms of practice. And if I practice really, really hard, I could have learned to play the guitar with a modicum of ability, yeah? But I had no natural affinity with it. Whereas I knew at the time I had an affinity to be able to put words together and an affinity to be able to draw and paint. It came very, very naturally to me. I started to work in it, of course, I started to practice drawing and painting and public speaking and so on and writing, but nevertheless, those were where my natural talents lay. And that's what I say to people, is we are all different. God gives us individual talents here that we're all supposed to bring to our table for the good of humanity. It's finding what your talent is and how you can develop that the best. And also, obviously, I say, I have now learned musical appreciation over the years. It's been a difficult thing for me. Certainly cannabis has helped in that regard. But nevertheless, I know my own talents, that I don't know it with music, but I do know it with words. So understanding again human consciousness being like that, musical talent, ability to write pre-exists us. We're born into it, and we have to develop it within with the consciousness we have, basically. But thank you for having me on there. So I've never in an interview spoken like this before. You've got the whole thing, and that's because I say I really do believe that at a fundamental level, in a few days' time, we are going to see massive change. Maybe to do with Three Eye Atlas, I don't know. Certainly, if you know your key, what I call the Shadra key, which is a way of using the Hebrew letters, if you were to transcribe those letters into Hebrew and retranscribe them into English letters using different recognized transcription of the Hebrew letters, you would have an anagram of Shayler, basically T Shayler or D Shayler. So I do believe this comet is part of that. And even if it's not this one, we're going to get a whole lot more of them, basically.
Yes, we'll all be on tenterhooks. Dave, thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much for this interview, and God bless.
Yes, just stay on the line. So I'm just going to play us out, and then I'll say goodbye to you properly. But for the purposes of the recording, massive thanks for coming on the show. Friends at home, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. We got to see the real Dave Shayler, and Dave, thank you for everything you've done around the events in New York and Washington and subsequent shenanigans, should I say. Friends, if you can like and subscribe, that would be absolutely awesome. And we'll see you next time. Much love.
God bless.